Hi everyone, and welcome to this first video of the course. We're going to be talking a little bit about leadership. Now, as we've said, there are over 60,000 books on leadership available on Amazon. So we're going to try and bring those together or summarize them in less than 10 minutes, which I imagine is about the extent of our attention span in a YouTube video. We're going to start by trying to think about some of the differences between management and leadership, and these are some distinctions made by Gill in 2006. You can see a link to his work in the course, trying to kind of make a distinction between what we would consider management, of more administration, more maintaining than developing, more keeping things, maintaining the status quo, keeping things steady, rather than changing people's behavior or changing, originating, creating new ways of working. I like to think of this difference between management and leadership more as a continuum, and we are probably always doing a little bit of management and always doing a little bit of leadership. I don't think there's really such a thing as either or, managing or leading. We're always kind of doing a little bit of the two things, but it's interesting to make that distinction, and it's interesting for us to think about leadership as we build up towards the tasks for this chapter, for this module. The early 20th century ideas of leadership and of commanders and leaders of men and leaders of people very much were thinking about men rather than men and women, based on early great man theories from the 19th century, people like Lord Thomas Carlyle, for whom history is the history of the deeds of great men, and he was very much thinking of men and not women. Hopefully things are changing today, and I think when we look at some of the traits and qualities that we look for in leaders today are very different from what we would be looking at the beginning of the 19th century. But trait theory suggests that there's a set of personal characteristics that can exemplify the ideal leader. When I was at school, people used to talk of children who had leadership qualities and others who didn't. Those of us who were sheep and those of us who were border collies, if you like. By the mid-20th century, we got this idea that leadership is something that we can learn, that it's behavior. We're focusing on what leaders do and how they do it. And this assumption really that leadership can be learned and it can be developed. By the late 20th century, we were getting more contingency type theories and thinking more about leadership as resolving complex problems and adapting our style of management, our style of leadership to different situations, that we would work in a certain way depending on different situations. And then leadership becomes like a series of ways of being, ways of acting, competencies that we can develop. In this course, we're going to look at leadership through complex problem solving, through motivating others, through motivating ourselves as well. And really then the final part will be how we can design better ways of working for ourselves and for others. So we're very much kind of in a developing and moving world is as regards leadership. The discourses of leadership are an attempt by the writer Simon Weston from his very interesting book, Leadership, a Critical Text, which I found very useful when I was doing my postgraduate studies. He kind of divides or discerns four great movements of leadership, which can help us a little bit to make sense of 100 years of management trends and fashions, not just in management, but also in public health management, in education, everywhere. People have been working on how to work and make work other people, really. He decides that he describes a controller scientific management paradigm for the early part of the century based on control. And this would come from the work of people like Frederick Winslow Taylor with his scientific management theory that there is a correct way to do things, that there are ways of working and there are ways of not working, and the manager or the leader's task really is to find that optimal way of working. This was filled the factories and the workplaces of the time with normally men with checklists and stopwatches who were defining the best way to work. We still see this today in industrial contexts, in production lines, where there's a high safety or quality control needed, in construction. Sometimes, not definitely in the work that they're doing on my house at the moment. Project management, task management, we need leadership and management as control of ourselves and others. The strengths of this, that it's very strong on results, gets the task done, it's efficient, it gives us lots of empirical data. What are the weaknesses of over controlling people who work with us is that we can create a them and us culture. We can alienate people who are working with us. And sometimes we make a poor use of human capacities as people wait for us to tell them what to do. And it can create lots of disputes. Where doesn't it work? Well, it doesn't really work in post-industrial workplaces, in the knowledge economy. In education, although most of our education system is based on this, it's possibly not the best system. In entrepreneurship, in the creative sector, in strategic leadership, and possibly it's not the ideal style of leadership or management to have in place in a research group, to be perfectly honest. There are other paradigms, the therapist paradigm, which kind of rises up from the work, the Hawthorne studies of Mayo and ideas of Maslow, Hertzberg later, which look very much at the human side of management and leadership, the need to build trust, work on intelligence, is other than just cognitive intelligence, our emotional intelligence, work on our communication, personal development, personal growth. We find it in the educational sector, in the healthcare sector. Between middle managers, this can be a very useful style of leadership. The weakness is, well, sometimes we lack vision, we lack a strategic approach. There's a lack of dynamism and energy, and it can create quite weak cultures, as we're going to see in a minute when we have a look at organizational culture. It can create organizations which are more focused on the employees than on the end users, be they students, be they patients in a hospital, or users of administrative services in the public administration. Where it doesn't work, where there's a lot of rapid change, where multinationals with complex structures, in industry, in companies with a focus on tasks and projects, it can be a little bit slow. The next of the big paradigms from Simon Weston is what he considers the messianic approach to leadership and management. And we see this becoming very popular in the 1980s, 1990s, with the concept of transformational leadership, which is based on inspiration, on the individual, on innovation, creating very strong figures of leaders who inspire. We think of some examples, we probably spring to mind people like Steve Jobs, or for my generation, people like David Bowie, or more musicians than business people, really. The strengths of this, that it builds a very strong culture, very focused culture, in rapidly moving environments. This can be very useful. It's got normally accompanied by a very strong vision, a strategic sense, can create strong and consistent messages. We very much find it in tech, in sports, in multinationals, in post-industrial companies, basically anywhere where people end up dressing like the boss, wearing the same color tie if it's in a bank, or wearing the black long sleeve t-shirt if they're in the tech sector. Anywhere where people create this culture where people want to copy, we're going to find a strong messianic culture. I'm going to take a pause for a second. Some of the dangers of messianic leadership obviously are what we call pseudo-transformational leadership, which normally has very negative ethical and physical consequences for a lot of the followers. The danger is that we can create such a conformist, homogenous culture that we can stop creativity and stop innovation. The message occasionally gets confused with the reality, and it can be a very negative, very homogeneous type of culture that we create with this messianic culture. Also, it creates very conformist cultures where people are often very slow to criticize things which are generally wrong and generally negative for the society as a whole, or for the group, really. The answer to all this, says Simon Weston, is the development of what he calls eco-leadership, kind of a more sustainable leadership for the 21st century. As we move into more knowledge work, more project work, more team-based work in the workplace, he says that we have a need for more distributed leadership, more democratic leadership, more interdependent leadership, and work as people, as knowledge workers. We're going to see in the second part of the course that knowledge work, the work that we're all actually doing, is actually much more complicated than we would like to think. And there are lots of dangers of low motivation and cyber loafing and suffering extreme boredom in the workplace, where eco-leaders need to create places for thought, for reflection, need to build networks of interconnected workers communicating, feeling free and open and autonomous and able to express their opinions and contribute as participants, active participants, to the work of the group. Now, Simon Weston's quite an optimistic and positive thinker on leadership and on working together. And I hope that in this course, we're going to see different ways in which we can move towards that healthy, positive workplace. A lot of the style of leadership that we choose, and we've seen 4 here, but really we could make a list of at least 24 different styles of leadership, really is going to determine the culture that we create in our organization or in our group of workers. And this Blake Mouton grid, which is quite old now, I'll give you a link to this below in the course, says that really the type of culture that we create is going to depend to a large extent on our style of leadership and management, and the concern that we show either for the people working for us or concern for the task. That where there is no concern for the task and there is very little concern for the people working with us, we're going to create a very impoverished, low people, low task culture, what we call weak management, weak leadership, where people aren't going to be productive, but they're not going to be happy. If we go too far in the therapy type leadership of high interest on people, the welfare and the well-being of people, but very low interest in the task itself and in the productivity, we're going to create something of a country club culture, which I enjoy that. I think it's a great description where people are extremely happy to go to work because they feel respected and loved and appreciated, but nobody is demanding of them too many results. And I'm sure that we can all think of places that we know of that are a little bit like that, where there's over concentration on the task and very little interest in the people. We get a high authority, a high obedience culture, where people will be very productive, but they won't be happy, and they may end up leaving the organization very quickly. The ideal that we should be aiming towards, and we're going to look at pretty much organization of team leadership and networks and community leadership in this course, because this is actually a very much more difficult thing than people imagine. And also there are moments to use teams, and there are moments when we don't really want teams so much. When we're focusing high on the people, high on the task, for Blake and Mouton, this is team leader. Middle of the road is kind of a little bit of everything and a lot of nothing. It's not really necessarily a positive place to be. We can, in a middle of the road type culture, get a lot of people languishing quite happily, not being very productive and not feeling very loved either. More ways of describing culture, because these are all theories. They're imperfect and they are always being developed. We could look at Cameron and Quinn's competing values framework to describe organizations and how they work. And they divide into 4 different blocks that are pretty much all like grids when we look at organizational cultures. We've got a human relations model, which again is kind of the therapy idea of leadership, where we build teams, everybody's participating in their decision making, managing the conflict. We've got an internal process model, which is kind of very much inward looking, monitoring personal performance, managing the collective performance, which would be more of a control paradigm here, more of a hierarchical culture. The clan culture would be more the human relations model. A rational goal model would be more market oriented. If we were in our research group very needy of public funds, well, we may go through a process of selling our ideas to others, working productively, fostering a productive working environment, but very much focused on the market and the people who can buy our knowledge, really. And then the open systems model, which would be the most creative, is more of an adocracy, more of a holocracy. It's very externally focused, it's very flexible, very dynamic workplaces where everyone feels a lot of equality, a lot of diversity in the members of the team. We're very focused on creating change, and this will be very much Western's eco model of leadership. In this video, we can't really summarize the whole 100 years, 60,000 books of leadership and management, but hopefully this video gives you a little bit of an idea of how the way that we lead others, the way that we manage others, the way that we manage projects and research projects really is going to influence the culture that we generate. And there are cultures that are more useful to us when we are generating, expanding knowledge in an organization and in our research group and amongst our people than others. I'm going to pause this video because we've got to 20 minutes and I'm very well aware that people kind of disconnect after a very short space of time when they're watching videos in an online course. Okay, we'll be back briefly with another video for you, which will describe a little bit the activity that I want us to do for this week.